Today we are continuing on our off-season content, and we are going to talk about every team's all-time Mount Rushmore. So there's a fine line when you're talking about a Mount Rushmore. Are you going to talk about the 4 best players in their franchise history, or the 4 most important / popular players in franchise history? For me, it's going to be a combination of the two. Now, what they did not on the team does not matter. It's only the time they spent with that team is going to matter. We're going to pick 4, and I'd love to know your favorite team's all-time Mount Rushmore. Let me know the top 4 in the comments. And this is obviously going to be on current day as well. I'm not really projecting too much what it's going to be at the end of these players' careers with these teams if they're active. So we're going to start off with the New York Knicks, and I'm saying that because Jalen Brunson will not be on the Mount Rushmore just yet. If I had to predict it, by the time he's done on the Knicks, I think he'll be on it, but we have a lot of historic players here. You got to start off with the best player in franchise history, the #1 overall pick from the 1985 NBA draft out of Georgetown, Patrick Ewing. Patrick Ewing is a Hall of Famer. He was an 11-time All-Star with the New York Knicks, a 7-time All-NBA member. He was the Rookie of the Year from his class, 3-time All-Defensive Team. He's also on NBA's 75th anniversary team. And with the New York Knicks across 15 seasons, he averaged 23 points, 10 rebounds, and 2.7 blocks a night. In my opinion, is the best player by far in their franchise's history. Next up, you got to talk about one of their color commentators right now, Walt Frazier, the best passer in franchise history, also another Hall of Famer. I'm also going to mention Willis Reed, another Hall of Famer here. There's a trend with this. He played all 10 of his years in the NBA with the Knicks and also won an MVP award with them in 1970. And for now, I'm going to have Carmelo Anthony on the Mount Rushmore as well. Like I said, by the time Jalen Brunson is done with the Knicks, I think he's going to take that spot from Carmelo Anthony. But Melo made the Knicks relevant again in the early 2010s, even won a scoring title with them. Onto the Toronto Raptors. I actually think this one is pretty easy. You got to put Kawhi Leonard here. He was the Finals MVP in their first franchise title in their history in 2019. Even though he only played 1 year, he's got to make it. Next up, you have 2 obvious spots as well, going to Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan, pretty much running this Raptors team throughout the 2010s. Kyle Lowry was the second best player on that 2019 team, and DeMar DeRozan maybe the best pure scorer in franchise history. And the last couple spots, you can maybe talk about Jose Calderon, you could talk about Pascal Siakam. I'm going to give it to Vince Carter, though, who started off his career with the Toronto Raptors and ended up spending 7 years there, averaging 23.5 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists a night. But I could definitely see if you want to also give it to like Chris Bosh as well. Funny enough, Vince Carter is making this for another team. He's going to be on the Brooklyn Nets Mount Rushmore. He's going to be joined by Jason Kidd, his teammate in New Jersey at the time. You can make an argument is the best player in franchise history. He ended up spending 7 years in New Jersey, averaging 14.5 points, 9 assists, and 7 rebounds a night. Even finished runner-up in MVP voting in 2002. And was such a vital part to those championship teams, even though they lost them in 2002 and 2003. It wasn't with the New Jersey Nets in the NBA, it was with the New York Nets, but I gotta have Julius Erving here from the ABA, where he won 3 straight MVP awards back in the 70s. And the last spot I'm giving to is Buck Williams. For the Philadelphia 76ers, I got an active player making it. We have Joel Embiid making this Mount Rushmore. 7-time All-Star, 2-time scoring champion, and the 2023 MVP winner is definitely going to make you appear on this list. I also have Dr. J making it with the Philadelphia 76ers. He was better with Philadelphia than he was with the Nets. And he did win the 1981 MVP award. You also have Charles Barkley with the Philadelphia 76ers, who didn't win an MVP with Philadelphia, but was one of their best players in franchise history. And the last spot is an MVP winner, and that is Allen Iverson. That's a clear spot there. For Boston, it's insanely tough because they have such a rich franchise history. You have to go with one of the best players of all time in Larry Bird. You spent all 13 years with the Celtics, a 3-time NBA champion, a 3-time MVP, and obviously a Hall of Famer. You have to go with Bill Russell as well. 13 years with the Celtics, even coached them, a 5-time MVP winner, and an 11-time NBA champion. I think you also have to include Paul Pierce, 19 years in the NBA, and 15 of them being with the Boston Celtics. He's a Hall of Famer, and he was the Finals MVP on their 2008 title team. The last spot is tough. I do think it's going to be Jason Tatum when it's all said and done with his time in Boston, but for now, I'm giving it to Kevin McHale, who's the second best player on those Larry Bird championship teams. We're going from one of the richest histories in the sport to maybe one of the poorest histories in the sport. We're going to talk about the Charlotte Hornets / Bobcats. Definitely making this list is Kemba Walker, pretty much their best player in franchise history. Kemba spent 8 years in Charlotte where he averaged 20 points, 5.5 assists, and 4 rebounds a night, and made 3 All-Stars with the team. I know it's kind of sad that being your best player in franchise history. Next up, you have Gerald Wallace, who spent 7 years in Charlotte, averaging 16.5 points, 7.5 rebounds, and 2 steals a night, and it was one of their best defensive players in franchise history. You can talk about their best 3-point shooter in franchise history as well, making this list, and Del Curry, the father of Steph Curry, where Del spent 10 years in Charlotte. That's pretty much the threshold to make this list, where he averaged 14 points and shot 41% from 3. And the last spot is going to go to Larry Johnson, who spent 5 years in Charlotte, but was elite in those 5 years, where he averaged 20 points and 9 rebounds a night. For the Atlanta Hawks, we're going to have a lot of old heads on this list, we got Bob Pettit, who was a Hall of Famer, and he was drafted in the 1954 NBA draft. He played for the St. Louis Hawks, which is still technically the Atlanta Hawks, and he won multiple MVP awards with them and averaged 26 points throughout his career. Joining him is Cliff Hagan, who also spent time with Bob Pettit in those 1950 St. Louis Hawks. Not as old as them, but we got Lou Hudson, who is a Hall of Famer. He was drafted with the 4th overall pick in the 1966 draft and actually spent time with the Atlanta Hawks, making multiple All-Star appearances for them. And lastly, we do have Dominique Wilkins, probably their most popular player in franchise history, a Hall of Famer, and spent 15 years in the NBA, 12 with Atlanta, and averaged over 26 points a night. And I do think when it's all said and done, if they don't trade Trae Young soon, he will make this list. For the Miami Heat, I actually think this is pretty easy. You obviously have Dwayne Wade, who is the best player in franchise history. Now, this goes back to what I said in the beginning. During LeBron's time in Miami, yes, he was better than Dwayne Wade and is obviously a better player than D Wade in their respective careers. But for Miami, he's the most important player there. So you have Dwayne Wade, and then you obviously have LeBron James. Instead of going Chris Bosh, I have a different big man in Alonzo Mourning, who spent 11 years with the Heat, averaged 16 points and 8 rebounds, and was on that 2006 title team. And not taking Chris Bosh here, I'm going to go with Jimmy Butler, actually, a current Miami Heat, who has brought the Miami Heat to 2 NBA Finals appearances, one in 2023, the other one in the bubble in 2020. But I do think if Bam is going to spend another 10 years with the Heat, he's going to make this list when it's all said and done. For the Washington Bullets and Wizards, we're actually going to talk about somebody that was on the team when they were the Baltimore Bullets, and that is going to be Wes Unseld, who was their only MVP winner in franchise history and was also the 1978 Finals MVP with them. I'm going to talk about Elvin Hayes as well, who spent 9 years with Washington, and he averaged 21 points and 13 rebounds a night. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about John Wall and Bradley Beal making this list. I ended up going with Bradley Beal over Gilbert Arenas or any one of those guys. You guys can let me know if you're a Wizards fan who would make those final 2 spots, but I'm going to go with the #1 overall pick in 2010 in John Wall and the #3 overall pick in 2012 in Bradley Beal. For the Orlando Magic, I think this is pretty easy. You got to go with Shaquille O'Neal, who was the #1 overall pick back in 1992. Now, he only spent 4 years in Orlando, but is arguably the best player in franchise history, averaging 27 points and 12.5 rebounds and multiple top 10 MVP finishes with them. Now, he might be the greatest player that has ever played for the Magic. You got to talk about, I think, the best player over a span of time, and that is Dwight Howard, who was the #1 overall pick in 2004 and spent 8 years in Orlando. He brought them to an NBA Finals appearance, and he averaged 18 points and 13 rebounds and won 3 straight Defensive Player of the Year awards. And the last 2 spots making this list, I do have Penny Hardaway and Tracy McGrady, some of the best scorers in franchise history. For the Cleveland Cavaliers, they don't have too much franchise history outside of having the greatest player of all time, arguably, in LeBron James. LeBron obviously had 2 different stints in Cleveland where he spent over 11 years with them, 27 points, 7 rebounds, 7 assists, 2 MVP awards with them, and was the Finals MVP on the 2016 championship team. Also, his teammate from 2016 is making this list, the #1 overall pick in 2011 in Kyrie Irving. And then you had 2 players that played before the year 2000 making it for the Cavs in Mark Price and Brad Doherty. For the Milwaukee Bucks, you could say that an active player should be the #1 on their Mount Rushmore, and that is Giannis Antetokounmpo, who is a 2-time MVP winner with the Bucks, helped them win a title in 2021 and was their best player and 1 Finals MVP. He's had multiple top 5 MVP finishes, an All-Star MVP, 5-time All-Defensive Teams, a Defensive Player of the Year award. Like I said, could already be their best player in franchise history for the team. And joining Giannis, you have Oscar Robertson, Sidney Moncrief, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. For the Detroit Pistons, you gotta talk about the best player in franchise history, in my opinion, Isaiah Thomas, who spent 13 years with the Pistons. Every single year of his career was with Detroit. Never won an MVP award, but he was a multiple-time All-Star, 12 All-Star appearances, and was the 1990 Finals MVP. If you get a Finals MVP with your team, you're gonna be up there. And then joining Isaiah Thomas, you have his teammate from that 1990 Finals championship team, Joe Dumars. And then you got 2 players from that 2004 championship team making the list, one in Chauncey Billups and the other one being Ben Wallace. You would think the Chicago Bulls would have a richer franchise history. Now, they were obviously the most popular team in the world in the 1990s. Outside of that, it kind of got interesting. Now, you obviously have Michael Jordan, who you could say is the greatest player of all time. He won 6 titles with the Chicago Bulls, 2 different three-peats. He was a 10-time scoring champion, which is unreal, an 11-time All-NBA member, a 14-time All-Star, and a 5-time Finals MVP winner. Also, 6 Finals MVPs is just insane. And then also joining him, you have his teammate during those days in Scottie Pippen. And then wrapping it out, you had the best player before Michael Jordan in franchise history, Artis Gilmore, and then probably the best player after Michael Jordan in Derrick Rose, who was the youngest MVP in NBA history. The Pacers were interesting as well. Now, there's a clear #1 in Reggie Miller, Hall of Famer, played every single year of his career, all 18 years with the Pacers. He was a 5 5-time All-Star and a 3-time All-NBA member. Joining him, you do have Paul George, who was drafted in 2010 and then traded in 2017. I also have Jermaine O'Neal making this list, who spent 8 years with Indiana, averaging 18.5 points and 9.5 rebounds. And then the last spot was kind of tough. You could go with a bunch of guys. I just went with Tyrese Halliburton. He just brought them to a conference finals appearance. I know he's only spent like 2 years there, but I'm taking him over Roger Brown or Dale Davis or even Rick Smits. For the Sacramento Kings, the best player in franchise history who's going to lead off this list is going to be Oscar Robertson, the Big O, who spent time when they were the Cincinnati Royals. And he won an MVP award with them in 1964. Across 10 years, he averaged 29 points, 10 assists, and 8.5 rebounds. They called him the Mr. Triple-Double. And joining the Big O, you're going to have DeMarcus Cousins, even though they never made the playoffs with him. He's still one of the best players in franchise history. And joining DeMarcus Cousins, I have De'Aaron Fox, who they did draft in 2017, and Peja Stojakovic, who was on those really good Kings teams in the early 2000s. For the LA Lakers, this may be the toughest Mount Rushmore to do, and yeah, I don't have LeBron James making it. I do have Kobe Bryant leading it off, who might be the most popular LA Laker of all time. 20 years in the NBA, all with the Lakers, an 18-time All-Star, a 4-time All-Star MVP, 2-time Finals MVP, a 12-time All-Defensive Team member, all with the Lakers, and won the 2008 MVP award, averaging 25 points per game across his career. But right up there with Kobe, you got to talk about Magic Johnson, arguably the greatest point guard in NBA history. And it's tough. The next two guys joining them, I do have Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who spent 14 seasons with the Lakers and averaged 22 points per game. And the last spot you could give to LeBron, especially if he plays like 2 to 3 more years, and he already has a Finals MVP with them. But I'm going to take someone that ended up spending 8 years in Los Angeles and won 3 finals with them, including 3 Finals MVPs. And the last spot is going to go to Shaquille O'Neal. For the LA Clippers, I'm going to talk about the point guard Chris Paul, where he just spent 6 years with the Clippers, but turned that franchise around, averaging 19 points and 10 assists a night, and had multiple top 10 MVP finishes with them. Joining him is going to be the #1 overall pick from the 2009 draft that was part of the Lob City Clips with CP3, and that is Blake Griffin. And the last 2 spots are going to go to DeAndre Jordan, who is also part of the Lob City Clips. And the last spot was tough. It's between Elton Brand or Kawhi Leonard. I'm actually going to go with Elton Brand. For the Phoenix Suns, the best player in franchise history, in my opinion, is Steve Nash, who spent 10 years with the Suns in 2 different stints, including winning the MVP award in back-to-back years in 2005 and 2006. Joining Steve Nash, you have another MVP winner in Charles Barkley, and then joining those two, you have an active player in Devin Booker and a player that played in the 90s in Kevin Johnson. And for Golden State, there's a clear #1 in Steph Curry. Steph is still active today. Across the 15 years with Golden State, he is a 10-time All-Star, a 2-time MVP, including a unanimous MVP in 2016, a 4-time NBA champion with the Warriors, and was the Finals MVP in 2022. And joining Steph, you have 2 of his teammates from those Warriors dynasties. You have Draymond Green and Klay Thompson, and then a pretty notable player joining those 3 in Wilt Chamberlain. For the Minnesota Timberwolves, you're going to start off with Kevin Garnett. KG spent the first 12 years of his career with the Minnesota Timberwolves, where he won the 2004 MVP award and was one of the best defensive players in the league throughout that time. Joining KG, you had a double-double machine in the late 2000s and early 2010s in Kevin Love. And then joining those 2, you have 2 active players in Karl Anthony Towns, the #1 overall pick from 2015. And yeah, the #1 overall pick from 2020. I also have Anthony Edwards making this list as well. Not too much history in Minnesota. For the OKC Thunder, you could split this into the Seattle Supersonics and the Thunder. And for OKC, I know it didn't end well, but you have Kevin Durant as the #1. KD spent 9 years with the Seattle Supersonics and the Oklahoma City Thunder, and he averaged 27.5 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 assists a night, and won the 2014 MVP award with OKC. And joining KD, you have Russell Westbrook, who was a MVP in the 2017 season. You have an active player in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and I'm going with a all-time role player for them in Nick Collison. And then for the Seattle Supersonics, the 4 I picked were Gary Payton, Sean Kemp, Jack Sikma, and Rashad Lewis. For the Portland Trailblazers, the best player in franchise history, in my opinion, is Clyde Drexler over Damian Lillard. Clyde is a Hall of Famer. He made 5 All-NBA appearances with the Portland Trailblazers, and across 12 years, he averaged 21 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists a night, and he brought them to an NBA Finals as well. And then obviously next to him, you have Damian Lillard, who I just talked about, and joining those 2, you have LaMarcus Aldridge and Bill Walton. For the Denver Nuggets, it's crazy, but the active player is the best player in franchise history, in my opinion, and that is Nikola Jokic. Nikola Jokic, at 29 years old, is the greatest Nugget of all time, a 6-time All-Star, a 3-time MVP winner, and a Finals MVP on the 2023 championship squad, and he's been the best player in the NBA over the last 4 seasons. And joining Nikola Jokic, you do have Carmelo Anthony, Alex English, and the last spot is tough, but I'm going to give it to Jamal Murray. For the Utah Jazz, this is pretty easy. You're going to talk about one of the best passers of all time, if not the best passer of all time, in John Stockton. John Stockton spent all 19 years of his career with the Utah Jazz. 10-time All-Star, 11-time All-NBA member, 9-time assist champion, 5-time All-Defensive member, and helped the Jazz go to multiple finals in the 90s. And joining him, you have Pistol Pete Maravich, Karl Malone, and an active player today that won multiple Defensive Player of the Years with Utah, 3 of them. He was traded in 2022, but drafted in 2013, and Rudy Gobert. For the Rockets, I do think it's a clear 4. Number 1 best player of all time is Hakeem Olajuwon, who spent 18 years in the NBA, 17 of them being with the Houston Rockets, where he won back-to-back Defensive Player of the Years in 1993 and 1994, and then in 1994, while winning Depoy, he won MVP. He's one of the greatest players in NBA history, and joining Hakeem, you do have James Harden, Moses Malone, and Yao Ming. For the Dallas Mavericks, number 1 all-time is Dirk Nowitzki. Dirk spent all 21 years of his career with the Dallas Mavericks. He's a Hall of Famer, obviously, 14-time All-Star, 2007 League MVP, and also was Finals MVP of the 2011 championship team. And joining Dirk, you have Jason Kidd, Mark Aguirre, and active player Luka Doncic. The Pelicans, they don't have too much franchise history, and the best player in their team all time, I'm gonna go with Anthony Davis over Chris Paul. AD spent the first 7 years of his career with the Pelicans/Hornets, where he averaged 24 points, 10.5 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks a night, but it's very close. You can also have Chris Paul in there as well. And I'm also gonna go with Drew Holiday making this, and active player Zion Williamson. But shout out to David West. It was tough leaving him off this. For the San Antonio Spurs, there's 5 guys I want to put, but the top 4, number 1 is Tim Duncan, who spent 19 years in the NBA, all 19 with the Spurs, a 5-time NBA champion, 3-time Finals MVP, 2-time League MVP, and a 15-time All-Star. Joining Duncan, you have to go with David Robinson. Joining those 2, you have to go with the 2014 Finals MVP winner in Kawhi Leonard, and that leaves 2 spots remaining for Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker. Manu spent 16 years with the Spurs, and Tony Parker spent 17. Parker does have that Finals MVP, so I'm going to go with him. And then lastly, for the Memphis Grizzlies, number 1 all-time in my opinion, Marc Gasol, who spent 11 years with the Grizzlies, and he averaged 15 points, 8 rebounds, and 3.5 assists a night, and won the 2013 Defensive Player of the Year award with them. Joining Gasol, you have 2 other grit and grind Grizzlies. You got Mike Conley, the point guard throughout it all, and the best defensive player on those teams in Tony Allen. And to finish things off, I have an active player in Ja Morant. So that is going to be it for me. I hope you guys did enjoy. Let me know your favorite teams all time, Mount Rushmore, down below. Did I get it right? Let me know. And drop a like if you guys did enjoy this video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.